In this lesson, we're going to continue our idea of mortgages by looking at conditions of a mortgage. Uh, I'd mentioned this in the last lesson, and I'll continue to mention it pretty much in all of our lessons. And that's that despite what I'm telling you today, despite what I'm saying in this lesson, rules change over time. You're always going to want to make sure you're as informed as possible when you're making a decision like this, talking to a financial advisor, talking to your bank, possibly talk to a second bank and get their opinions, see what their interest rates are. Very small changes in interest rates between one agreement and another can make a huge, huge impact on how much you end up paying for your home in the long run. So everything I'm telling you now is true as of the time that I'm doing it, but go seek out proper information when you're actually ready to purchase a house. Okay, so the good news in this one is we're not going to do too much actual math calculations. We get to take a break from that today, and we're going to use an online calculator for this lesson. So I've put the link there. If you have the handout for this, you can just click on it digitally, or you can type it in if you want. And if this link is broken, or if you don't feel like doing this, or later down the road when you're trying to figure this out in 3, 4, 5 years, there's absolutely no reason that you can't just Google mortgage payoff calculator or mortgage calculator and look through a bunch of them. Try to find one that's Canadian, but really they all do more or less the same thing. Some have slightly different features than the one I'm going to show you today, but um, they all will give you what you need to know. All right, so what we're going to do is look at the effect of paying off our mortgage faster. So if we increase the amount that we pay for our mortgage over the bare minimum of what the loan agreement says, and again, you'll have to check with the individual loan agreement to see that it's possible to do this. Usually it is possible to set up whatever loan amount or payment amount you want at the beginning of the mortgage when you set in the term, but you can often do, like, for instance, double up payments, either like regularly or occasionally. So if you have extra money sitting in your bank account, you'd like to pay off your mortgage faster, you can do that. Or let's say that you, I don't know, sold a car that you inherited or whatever, you came up with a few $1,000s, $10,000 of money that you didn't need for anything right now. You could often use that as a lump sum payoff to pay off your mortgage a little bit faster. Likewise, when you're buying a house, you may not buy the most expensive house that you could afford. You may buy one that's a little bit cheaper, and you can decide that, well, maybe I can pay more than the minimum payment, and that would make my life a little better because I can pay it off a little bit faster than the normal amortization period would normally be. So for question one here, let's just try this and see what happens. We're going to borrow $500,000 for a mortgage with an amortization period of 30 years, which is pretty much our default. The interest rate we'll use is 6%, and you can choose to make monthly payments. So what we're going to do is just switch over to this, and we'll set this up so that we can make payments, basically set up the information we have. So we're going to do the payment type here as monthly. We're making monthly payments. We're doing that over 30 years. We'll set this to 500,000 at a rate of 6%, and we're not going to pay off any extra. We're going to make the minimum payment that we're allowed to make, and it doesn't really matter if I set this now because we're making no additional payments, but I'll just set it to monthly to match up with our monthly payments up here. And if I click calculate up here, what it'll do is tell me that my current payments, my minimum payment that I can make is $2,974.12. And on the graph here, you can see that, oh, yeah, it looks like we're going to be paid off in 30 years. Okay, so I'm going to go over to our paper again and just fill that number in here. So our monthly payment, if we choose to make minimum monthly payments, is $2,974.12. Now, that would make sense to make monthly payments if we're getting paid monthly. Basically, there's no point in having money sitting in your bank account not doing anything for you. You're better to make payments with the money that you earn as soon as you earn it. So rather than get it sitting in your account for the few weeks and then making your payment, pay it right away, which means that if you get paid biweekly, you should make your mortgage payments biweekly. Okay, so what we're going to do is switch back over to our calculator here and just make that little change and see what it says. We'll change this to biweekly payments. And again, I'm going to change that one to biweekly. Not that it matters yet, but it will in just a moment. I'll click calculate. And it says now my current payment is $1,370.85. Okay, so $1,370.85. Okay, now if you notice, that's actually a fair bit less than half of the monthly payment. Half of the monthly payment would be about $1,487, give or take, and we're only paying $1,370. Now, part of that is because we actually are saving money on interest because money that normally would have sat in the bank for 2 weeks without getting, or sorry, money that normally would have sat in our bank accounts could have been used to pay off the mortgage, which would mean that we're paying less interest overall. But also, and this is something people usually don't think about, is that most people think of a month as being 4 weeks, but 4 weeks is 28 days, and most months are 30 or 31. So it's actually a little bit closer to 4.5 weeks per month, which means that you're going to have some months where you would actually make 3 biweekly payments. It'll happen a few times a year where your first Friday or your payday falls on the first or the second of the month, and then you'll pay again on like the 15th or 16th and again on the 30th or so. So anyway, if we pay off as soon as we get paid, or make our mortgage payment right away, we will save a little bit of money on interest. And then what many banks offer is something called accelerated payments. And the two most common type are accelerated biweekly or accelerated weekly. And they're based on people who get paid biweekly or paid weekly. And the idea is that despite the fact that it is less than your biweekly mandatory payment is less than half of a monthly payment, the accelerated part just makes the assumption that I'm going to pay half of a month's pay every 2 weeks, which really means that you're paying like 15 or 15 and a half days of mortgage every 14 days. So because you're paying a little bit extra, a little bit more than what you need to, you should be able to pay the house off a little bit faster. Okay, so if we want to figure out how long it would take to pay off the mortgage in question one using accelerated biweekly payments, what we do is we take our monthly payment, the $2,974.12, and we divide that by 2 because we're paying biweekly now, and accelerated biweekly means we're going to pay half a month's mortgage every 2 weeks. And that works out to be $1,487.06. Okay, so just to be clear, this is our mandatory payment every 2 weeks, assuming that we're going to pay off the house over 30 years. This is the accelerated payment, so it's going to be a little bit higher. And all that means is that we choose to pay off a little bit more than we have to, and that allows us to pay off the house a little bit faster. So I just have to figure out how much that is more than what is mandatory. So what I'm going to do is just take the $1,487.06, and I'm going to subtract off the $1,370.85 that we are required to pay. And that's going to give me $116.21. Wait, is that right? Let me double check that number. It looks wrong. No, that was right. Yeah, I think I'm just looking at the numbers backwards in my head. Okay, so we're making an extra $116.21 biweekly above what we are actually required to. So now what I'm going to do is go over to our calculator. And on the calculator, I'm going to make those couple little changes. So we're going to, we could go to accelerated biweekly manually, but I just want to show you how it works to kind of enter it in when we want to make an additional payment. So our regular payment is $1,370.85, but we're going to choose to pay $116, and my apologies, but the calculator will only allow me to do whole dollars. It doesn't let me enter in extra cents. So we'll just say $116 every 2 weeks as extra. And when I do that, if I look up here, you'll notice it says that it shortens my mortgage by 5.5 years. Well, that's pretty cool. I mean, that means that I just cut 5.5 years off my mortgage payment. So instead of taking 30 years to do it, it only takes me 24 and a half. And that was just by an additional $116 per payment. $116 out of something that's already in the ballpark of 1,500. So that little bit extra, and the reason for that is that our payments at the beginning are almost entirely interest. So any additional payment we do, it comes 100% off the principal. It actually pays off the loan instead of just paying off the interest without touching the loan. All right, so that saves us 5.5 years. So over here, I'm going to say that it takes us 24.5 years to pay off the loan with that accelerated biweekly payment. Now, the accelerated biweekly is really just an arbitrary value to say, well, let's pretend our monthly payment is just, we pay half of that every 2 weeks. But we don't need to do it that way. We can set it up with a much nicer number. So instead of saying, let's pay $1487.06 because that's what half a month would be, we could just say, let's just pay off, I don't know, 1,500 or 1,600 or 1,800 or 2,000 or whichever number you're comfortable with, whichever number or whichever amount you think that you can come up with on a biweekly basis. Choose the most that you're comfortable with and see how that will affect your payments on your loan. Okay, so if I go back over to the calculator for a second, if we want to do $1,500 payments and we need to do payments that would normally be $1,370. Okay, so normally $1,370, but we're going to pay $1,500. Then what we really want to do here is add another $170, or sorry, $130. So we went from $1,370 to $1,500. That's adding $130 biweekly. And when I do that, it shortens it by 6 years. Not a whole lot more than it did last time, but that's because we only went from a payment of $1,487 to a payment of $1,500. It was only an extra $13 a week or biweekly. But it did give us basically 5 years off our mortgage. Sorry, double check that number. 6 years off our mortgage. So that means we can pay this one off in 24 years. So putting a $1,500 payment versus a $1,370 payment took us from a 30-year loan to a 24-year loan. And then if we just do this with a few other numbers, if I go from $1,500 to $1,600, well, that's just another $100 biweekly. So I'll change that to $230. That takes 9 years off my loan. That's pretty cool. If I go up another $200 to $1,800, I'll just change that to $430. That's going to take 13.1 years off my loan. So only 16.9 years to pay off the whole thing. And if I could afford $2,000 biweekly, that would be the equivalent of increasing this by another 200. So 630. And that means I can pay off my mortgage 15.8 years early, which is 14.2 years. So I pay off my mortgage in less than half the amount of time by raising my payments from 1,370 to 2,000. Okay, so just to fill this back in, this we pay off our loan in 21 years. This one's 16.9 years. And 2,000 only 14.2 years. And you can see how much faster you can pay it off by fairly minimal increments above what you're required to pay. And again, the reason for that is that extra amount you're paying goes 100% off paying off the principal. So you're not putting most of your payment to the interest anymore. You're paying most of the original 1370 to the interest, but that extra money goes to paying down the principal so that you're paying less and less and less interest every month, which is always a good idea. All right, we're going to try one more question here. We're going to talk about pre-approval. I think I mentioned it in one of the previous videos, but I'll mention it again anyway. Whenever you buy a house, you're going to want to do a pre-approval with your bank or your lending institution. And that basically just gives you the freedom to go out and know how much you've got to spend and know that that money will be available should you choose to. So for instance, if you're like, well, I think I can spend 700,000 and you go out, you see a house for 650 and you're like, oh, that's perfect. We love this house. You put a bunch of effort into it. You put an offer in on the house and then you go to the bank and say, yeah, I found a great home, 650. They're like, yeah, we're not giving you that much. Then you're kind of stuck. If you, depending on how you write up your actual offer on the home, you may actually incur like significant financial penalties if you can't get the loan to actually buy the house. And at the very least, you put a lot of effort in to just lose out on the house that you wanted. So find out how much you're pre-approved for before you go house shopping, and that'll make sure that you're safe when you go to buy something. Okay, so we do in this case find out a home that's 529,000 while we were pre-approved for 600,000, so that should be safe to do. And I will say that regardless of what you're pre-approved for, you should probably look for something less anyway. Just to give you an idea of that, when I bought my house for 265,000, I was pre-approved for 600,000. And I look back now and think what I'd be like if I was spending twice as much on my mortgage payments or more than twice as much, and it actually kind of scares me because I would be very broke if I paid twice as much as I currently am in mortgage. Okay, so we find a home that's 529,000 and we want to figure out what our minimal biweekly payments will be amortized over 30 years at just 6.2% per year. Okay, so we're going to just switch over to there and let's make our little changes. So we're doing biweekly payments, still 30 years. Now we're doing a $529,000 house. The interest rate now is 6.2%. And we're going to make 0 additional payment to just figure out what our minimal payments required would be. So this will take 30 years to pay off, and those payments will be $1,480.91. So $1,480.91. And at this point, maybe you've gone through your finances and said, you know what, we kind of planned to pay off a $600,000 house with mortgage payments that would have been a little bit higher. So we're comfortable. We're comfortable coming up with $1,800 biweekly for our mortgage payments. So if we could pay off the $1,800 biweekly, maybe we should try to do that. And again, maybe you're around 30 years old when you're buying a house for the first time, and you look at this and saying, well, paying it off in 30 years means that I'll be 60. Maybe I want to retire when I'm 55. Maybe it would be really nice if I could pay off the house in 25 years so that I don't have to worry about making big mortgage payments once I'm retired. All right. So if we're willing to pay $1,800, if we take a look at our current amount, 14, we'll just round that off to 1480 and say that we're willing to make another $320 payment. So 320 on our 1480 would take us to 1800. So I'm going to make extra 320 each payment. And if I do that, it shortens my mortgage by 10.8 years. 10.8 years. That is not insignificant. So that means that we can actually pay off our mortgage in 19.2 years. So now you'll have your mortgage paid off by the time you're less than 50 years old instead of 60. And then if you want to try and retire at 55, well, you'll have 5 years to save up, basically 5 years where you're not making mortgage payments of $1,800 biweekly. That's 5 years of additional huge savings. So maybe you'll be in really good shape to retire at your age 55 like you wanted to. But again, these are all things to consider when it comes time to do it. Look into the details and make sure that you're making the best choice for you. I'm going to just give you some general advice now for mortgages. And again, this is the stuff that I'm telling you the way it is now. Things may change down the future, but hopefully this will work. And yeah, the first thing is that those rules change from time to time. So whenever it's time to actually borrow money for a house and buy a house, you want to talk to as many people as you can about what the rules are, what your options are, and what is probably going to be the best case scenario for you. Second thing is that most homes require a down payment of up to 20%. So if you want to buy a $700,000 home, you're going to have to actually come up with a $140,000 down payment, which is a little bit tricky for most people to do. Right now, I believe banks will allow you to make less than that. Again, the rules change over time. They've changed since I bought a house, that's for sure. And they'll let you make a lower down payment, but they often will give you a higher interest rate, which means you're going to pay a lot more in the long run. They may give you a shorter amortization period and say, we can't let you pay it off over 30. You're going to have to pay it off over 20, which again will hike up your payments. And there could be a mortgage insurance cost. So in the same way that you buy car insurance or house insurance to fix your house if it, is destroyed, you may have to pay mortgage insurance so that if for whatever reason you default on your mortgage, they will continue to make payments. But that could be an extra cost per month as well. So there's also rules about how much you can borrow from other places. So for instance, maybe you don't have a 20% down payment, but you could get a loan, not a mortgage, but a separate loan from a different bank for maybe $70,000 so that that would help pay towards 10% of the down payment value and you can pay the other 10% from savings. Um, but then there's rules about how much you can borrow for that and how long you can borrow that money for. So either way, you're going to want to look into what the rules are at the time for down payments. I've already talked about pre-approvals and their importance so that you can actually go out and buy the house that you want and know that you can afford it. And regardless of how much you get pre-approved for, they kind of usually do the pre-approval based on if you decide to spend all of your money on your house and live in poverty otherwise, this is how much we can give you. You don't want to live like that. You don't want to live in a really nice house where you have to eat like raw potatoes and stuff because you can't afford food or clothing or any of the other necessities. So you have a nice house but no furniture. You never get to go out anywhere or do anything because all of your income is going towards making your mortgage payments. So make sure that the amount that you're willing to pay on your mortgage is something that you're comfortable with paying and that you don't feel that it's going to destroy your lifestyle any more than it has to. I mean, the mortgage is a huge loan and it will be a huge part of your income, but you want to have enough money left over after that to pay for other things as well. So anyway, I hope this is useful. Again, all the rules change over time constantly, so always check with what's happening at the time you're ready to do it. But this should at least give you some decent guidelines to get you started with buying your first house.